So in this part, I'm going to talk about coming from films which are about women or which have a very large amount of female characters. Let's go into the more conventional kind of canvas that we see in Indian cinemas. So first off, let's start with the positive or the kind of film representation where female characters have a lot of space and say. So I want to talk about the introduction song for the character played by Aishwarya Rai in the Tamil film Kandukondain Kandukondain. This is a song called Konjam Mainakale. All these texts are very easily available on YouTube for participants to look at. So in the song called Konjam Mainakale, this film is an interpretation of Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility. So, in the song called Konjam Mainakale, what we can see is how the character played by Aishwarya Rai is the sensibility character in from the novel. So the spontaneity and her wildness and her grace and her desire to do something new and just see life in fanciful ways, etc., is communicated through this song. So we have sweeping camera shots, which are very different from how, for example, Noori was represented in the first song that I talked about. So we have the camera moving around in taking circular shots, tracking shots, etc., or a shaky camera being used to suggest this character's dynamism and her physical energy and her sheer her liveliness. So the shot opens with the camera coming up on the heroine from a lower level. So the camera is beneath the level that the actress is on, and the camera moves up, and then the camera moves around, and then the camera kind of peeks over her shoulder to look at what she's writing. She's writing some lines of poetry in on a pad that she has in her hand, and then the camera moves to the front, etc. So the kind of communication that the camera gives us is that this is a very intriguing person. We can look at her from different points of view. We can access her, as it were, her body, her subjectivity, etc., from these different angles, and she's there for us to consider and definitely also to, in a sense, consume with our eyes. So and it is the part is played by Aishwarya Rai, who is and who was at that time at the peak of her marketability as the world's most beautiful woman, etc. So, how the camera shows us the female person as somebody that we can look at and that we are allowed to look at with so much detail from different angles, etc., is what I would like everybody to think about here. So, she's the only woman present in this panoramic vista, again, like in Noori. Unlike in Bend It Like Beckham, where there were so many women in the household and the mise en scène was literally replete with women, but only one of them had this song of ardor and passion flowing out from her. So in this song in Kunjum Mainakale, the part played by the protagonist is to be the only female person in this natural canvas, the agricultural landscape of Tamil Nadu. So she's dancing, singing, moving, and the lyrics are communicating her zest for life. So the song more or less says that she wants new things to happen, new ways of looking at things. There should be enjoyment. Every day should be a festivity, etc. And the grace with which the actress moves through these lines is a striking performance of what it means to be feminine, to be a girl endowed with so much zest for life, etc. So in Noori, where there wasn't so much overt choreography, there wasn't so much dancing as much as just plain naturally moving through the environment. Of course, it's a simulation of nature. Natural movement, but in Noori, where there's a water pot, for example, and that pot suggests her fertility and her desire for eros, etc., In Konjum Mainakale, the sense of eros, despite the camera suggesting that we can look at this heroine, we can consume her, etc., the sense of eros is disrupted in a very interesting way through the goofiness or the literally the goofiness with which the actress dances. The choreography is performed in such a way that we are not invited only to consider her beauty, only to consider her grace, but also, you know, her not exactly minding that she's so beautiful. So the sense that the song produces for us is the idea that this is a very beautiful woman, of course, but she's not really thinking about her beauty all the time. Now, this is very striking because the song is beautiful. It is its colors, its use of costume, its choreography, the way the camera moves, all of them produce this aesthetic spectacle, which is really can only be described by the word beautiful. And despite that sense of beauty, we also have this note of authenticity, of personality coming through for the heroine. So she's not just a beautiful person, but she's also a person who has quirks and idiosyncrasies which make her a unique person. So I want us to think about how the camera works, or how films are able to communicate the sense of uniqueness and integrity and authenticity for female personae. So here, even though conventional beauty is replete, it fills up the scene in so many ways, there is this idea of authenticity that comes in, this idea of personal character that comes in through the way in which the actress moves. The dance moves that are given to her are moves in which she makes exaggerated movements, her face does not look conventionally pretty, etc., etc. But at the same time, she's the only female person in a field of, initially it looks like there's just her in the field, but then some male dancers come. So she's the only person who's female amongst these male dancers. So once again, the female becomes the cynosure of the eyes. She's one person who's different from all of the other people on in the frame with her. They are also painted or garishly dressed or wearing masks, etc. And they are all, none of them looks, they're dressed in a way in which the idea is to communicate them as symbols rather than as persons. So she's the only, you know, fully fleshed human being, as it were, that we see in the frame. So what we have is a presentation in which the heroine is presented as a person with her own ways of doing things, thinking things, etc. But still, things remain conventionally beautiful. So, here, because the camera is turning around or looking at her, capturing her from every angle, etc., what we get is this idea that the person, even if she has her own qualities and attributes, the idea that we get is that this person is somebody that we can look at, and, you know, we can kind of absorb her, take her in with our eyes. She's ours in a sense. So the idea of subjectivity or interiority, which she can own, which the female person can own for herself, that is in a sense missing from this kind of song, because the camera is everywhere. It goes around, there's so much movement, it's like she's fully captured. At the same time, because of her beauty and because of how the song is picturized, the the sense of desire that is awakened in us, the kind of longing that is awakened in us, is that we want to possess this person, even though the camera is suggesting to us repeatedly that it's not going to be easy to possess this person because she's a dynamic object. So how do we make her static? So we cannot make her static, but at the same time, that is what we desire to do to her. So this communication of what we want versus what that person is suggested through a constantly moving camera, through dance movements which are so dynamic, etc. And the gaze, the desire that we all feel is manifested in a particular way. Now, the interesting thing here is because the gaze is always thought of as the viewer's gaze is always thought of as masculine. When we look at this dancing character, when we look at how she's presented, and all the other people on the screen with her at that time are all male. So, what happens is that we are reifying once again this idea. We are once again, suggesting that either we want to possess that woman or we want to be that woman. But because there is no other female person present right there, the idea that another female person can desire her, that isn't really brought into play because there's only one unique female person. So it looks like, she fits into the normative spectacle of heterosexual desire. So reading this kind of scene against the grain becomes a lot more difficult when there's just one person. But at the same time, a lot of queer critical scholarship has shown that we can indeed desire, we can indeed change the gaze. It need not necessarily be a male gaze looking at female objects or female subjectivities and becoming heterosexualized. We can also read these relays of desire in other ways. So here, however, because the script takes us in a very different direction, this becomes very difficult to do, becomes difficult to play up or interact and introject, etc., into this scene. So, the next scene that I want to talk about is this scene from the film Pink. Uh, Pink is a film that again has probably been widely watched and everybody is familiar with, etc. There, I want to talk about a scene where the one of the protagonists, and this protagonist has complained about her sexual harassment by a powerful young man. So, and they're in the process. She and her two roommates are in the process of trying to go through with the legal processes associated with the complaint that they have filed. When she's kidnapped one evening when she's out on a jog, she is forced into a car by the friends and by the assailant himself. So she's kidnapped briefly while she's out for a jog, and in this scene again, the young woman is the only person present in the scene, and all the other people, the only female person present in the scene, and all the other people are male. But the interesting and striking thing here is, first of all, the rather than showing us, rather than narrating for us how or showing us how sexual harassment looks, what the film does at this point is show us how the young woman feels about the act of harassment that she's subjected to. So the process of kidnapping is brutal and violent. She experiences it as bruising or hard on her body. So she's dragged and thumped inside the car, and she can't see what's happening in the car because the windows are darkened and it's evening. It's past dusk. So her inability to see who has picked her up, her experience of the assault as something happening in the dark, where she's in the dark and she's unable to control the environment, her helplessness is suggested by the camera moving this side, that side, etc., jerkily, and it feels as if somebody's touching her, somebody's groping her, right? But she's not able to see who it is, and what is suggested to us is through a focus on her reactions to what seems to be happening to her body, we understand her fear and her tension and her sense of humiliation. So, what we have here is in content as well as in presentation the exact opposite of what we see in a song like Kunjam Mainakale. In Kunjam Mainakale, the scene is very well lit. It's out in the open. There are no obstacles to us seeing the heroine dancing. We are in fact invited to see the heroine dancing by the camera, the multiple cameras that show us her dancing from different angles. And the song and the lyrics and the music all go together to produce a spectacle that is not interrupted in any way. In think in the scene where the young woman is kidnapped briefly and people threaten her so that they pressure her to withdraw the case that she has filed. In that scene, we can't see much. All we can see is some bodies shrouded in the dark, mostly male, practically all male, and these bodies are unheroic, undesirable bodies to us simply because they are in the act of violating this girl. So the film asks us to take the position of the confused and humiliated and harassed protagonist and makes us enter into her helplessness by using a very low lit frame. The shot is shot in such low light that because we can't see what's going on, we understand, we start to empathize as viewers with what must be happening to her. So in a shot like this, in the composition of the shot is such that the viewer, if that viewer is presented as conventionally masculine, is suddenly being forced to or is being placed in a situation where if that viewer, even if he's masculine, if that viewer were being assaulted or if that viewer is finds his body being used in ways which are abusive or meant to harass him for his gender. So what's happening there is instead of taking instead of being in a position where you where the patriarchal gaze is strengthened, what happens is the camera is able to make the viewer rethink what patriarchal violence means or rethink the experience of being an object experiencing patriarchal violence. So the male gaze, or what is thought of as conventionally the male gaze, is placed in a position where the power or the normative access to privilege of that male gaze is reduced, in fact is made more empathetic. So the scene is powerful because not only do we not have a diegetic representation of exactly what they do to this girl, but we have the sense of her horror and her absolute dismay at what has happened. So that sense is communicated by the low light, the jerkiness of the camera, the inability of her to see what is being done to her, and at the same time, the because the camera is not showing us what those men are doing to her, we don't actually see assault now from the point of view of the assaulter. We're seeing it from the point of view of the person who is being assaulted. So you can actually use the mainstream canvas to create, therefore, a point of view or a place from where to understand, in this instance, sexual assault and sexual harassment, which, if not feminist, can certainly give you a point of view which is also not patriarchal. Now, this scene is different from almost all the other scenes in the film because for two reasons. All the other scenes are lit in a more conventionally brighter manner, and the film is it's a realist film. So the film's conventions show us reality and kind of explicate reality for us. But in this scene, because we don't understand, or because we are in a position where, along with the protagonist, we don't understand why this is being done to her, we don't accept it. So that sense of anger and that sense of being being violated, that sense of being humiliated, that sense of how power is used against bodies that are thought of as subordinate is communicated here. But in the rest of the film, a more patriarchal or a more conventionally normativized way of thinking about gender relations comes into play, particularly because the protagonist's lawyer is played by Amitabh Bachchan. So Amitabh Bachchan's star cachet as the angry young man, or as the man who can set things right, as the male presence for the positive or for the good or for ethical action, etc., represented in many of his personae on screen. So that idea is, it casts a very long shadow on how we think about the issues that the film is talking about. So, what we have is the protagonist's case being fought by a man who is identified as generally righteous in his screen roles. So, the focus in the rest of the film goes on to how men can speak for women, or how men can actually help women or defend women or save women, etc. And the film's diegetic trajectory also emphasizes the lawyer's brilliance in tackling thorny parts of the case. So, how he as a lawyer cracks the case becomes more significant at some point than how the protagonists feel about the experiences of harassment that they have been put through. So, if we look at the wider canvas of the film versus this particular incident where she's put into a car, she's abducted in the car, and we don't really know what's happening to her, yet we know, is a scene that I think places the viewer, all viewers, in the subordinate or feminized position rather than in the conventional male position that you expect the viewer to be in. So we have then the normative experience or the normative viewing position being replaced by a completely different kind of viewing angle, which I think is very interesting, and it's important because this is mainstream movies, this is conventional cinema, it's not some kind of art house film, but it's possible to do this within the mainstream narrative too, even though the rest of the film has a completely different ideation of who helps women or how can women be helped, etc. So, when we look at these presentations, these narrativizations of what it means to do femininity or what it means to occupy positions which have ideas which are not patriarchal or which try to reduce the violence of heteronormativity, etc., we see a lot of instances of lots of possibilities for how to view or critically reinterpret a lot of cinematic material. So I want to go to this Malayalam film now. It's called Female 22 Kottayam, and this is a film that comes from what can be called the new wave of the present decade of Malayali films. So in this film, we have a young woman who wants to be a nurse and emigrate to the West through her profession. So she falls victim to a man who pretends to be in love with her, but who's actually in the business of selling women for money to clients. So in the course of this film's narrative, Tessa is her name. So this character is raped by the client of the man that she thinks is her boyfriend, and in the narrative, the important the focal point, as it were, is the fact that this young woman is a nurse and her aspirations and her ambition of going abroad are what get her into trouble, in a sense, is what is communicated, because she's very eager to go abroad and she doesn't really have a lot of friends, or she doesn't really have a lot of family ties in India, which makes her victim to this man that she thinks is her boyfriend or her lover. So what happens is, in the rape scene that is the focal point of this film, we have this young woman in her nurse's uniform, but she is raped in her own house. So here again, what we have is an instance of the how do you represent, these issues which are known in, for example, feminist scholarship. You want to show the private sphere as a place where violence can happen. You don't want to demonize the public sphere as the only place where violence can happen. So this film actually is able to, in the mise-en-scène, because the character of the protagonist is a nurse, She's wearing her nurse uniform. She's just come back home from work, but she is raped at home rather than in her place of work, which is the hospital or some other public place. So what we see is the idea, the communication of the idea that this woman has faced sexual violence because she's a woman rather than simply because she's a nurse, right? So the idea that is communicated here is that it's not that her being a nurse gets her into trouble, it's the fact that she's a woman. It's working as a nurse while being a woman that endangers her. So communicating the idea that this woman is violated simply because she happens to be a woman doing care work, right? It's communicated by the kind of choice of costume in this mise en scène, where she's wearing the nurse's outfit, but it's not happening in a hospital, it's happening in a private space. So the shadow of patriarchal violence or gender relations and the idea of subordination, of conflict, because women are thought of as subordinate, is communicated through how the nurse uniform becomes the focal point in the depiction of this rape scene. So she's violated, and in the course of the violation, the antagonist beats her on the head with a gigantic household object like a vase or something. And there again, we see that the film is able to communicate to us the idea that rape isn't merely about sexual violence, it's about power relations, and it's about violence that is done to female bodies in the name of sex, but actually not only about sex, it's about dominance at other levels also. So the mise en scene's use of these choices, the nurse's outfit, the acts of violence, the way she's shown to be violated, she's pushed down to the ground, and it's not just about some kind of sexual pleasure, but it's about some kind of absolute enactment of dominance that the antagonist feels is communicated to us, but again from the point of view of the female protagonist, the person experiencing this violence. So what we have then is narrativizations of abstract concepts like what does it mean to be at the receiving end of patriarchy, done by these filmmakers through creatively using the mise en scène. In this film, A Female 22 Kottayam, and this film has been remade in other languages as well, we have at the very end this character getting her own revenge on the man who betrayed her. So how she gets her revenge is she does a penectomy on him. So it's a stand-in for and for the idea of castration as well. So being able to get revenge, being able to avenge yourself, being able to get justice, being able to do what you want, to be able to be agential in achieving your goals, etc. in this film is presented at the very end as an act of bodily changing the man. So in this film, even though the male character, he's chained to a bed, and his body has been modified, and of course he's not happy with that modification, right? So that male character is shown to be in the position of the violated person, which is rare for a lot of male subjects. So the violation, the kind of overturning of gender relations that we see in that scene, that violation, however, doesn't have a very neat reversal impact on us, because that male character who has just undergone the penectomy and who's struggling and who's in pain, etc., is still shown to be cocky and cocksure, and therefore unable, and therefore the female character is unable to silence him utterly. In fact, he tells her, "You are the woman, and therefore, because you're such an impactful woman, whenever I'm ready, I'm going to come back and seek you out again." This character is on her way to Canada, and the film's plot tells us earlier she didn't report the first rape that happens to her because she was trying to leave India. She did not want to pursue justice. So the film is trying to ask us the question of who should pursue justice. Are all victims responsible for the act of seeking justice, for the entire process of seeking justice, etc.? Or should there be other responsibilities, other people who have these responsibilities towards victims and so on? So at the end of the film, when she's seeking to emigrate to Canada, when this man tells her that I will seek you out when I am ready again, the idea that the film is able to communicate to us is that this story, this whole a violated woman getting revenge story is not over yet. That idea is communicated to us through the film's choice of shots. So we have uh, a sequence in which the female protagonist's face is in close up, and then there's this reverse where the man's face is in close up, and this shot reversal keeps going on. So it happens so often that you start to think of the female protagonist and the man who has done this to her as being somehow on par, as if the experiences that have happened to them are on par. So he has organized her rape and violation, and the violation of many other such women multiple times in the story. But because we have this shot and this close up and this reverse close up series of takes at the very end of the film, what happens is his act of trafficking women sexually and her act of trying to agentially restore a sense of dignity to herself through taking action on her violator are, when they are equated, produces a kind of paradox. Ethically, of course, we know that the two are not equal, but in terms of cinematic language, suddenly they become equal. So what happens then is the sense of closure that we have, the sense of the righteous thing having been done, the sense that this female person is the hero, that is withheld from us. We instead see a protagonist and an antagonist apparently on an equal, contextually flat plane. So there, even though we have this female narrative vehicle, just like in a film like Pink, even though this is supposed to be a woman's film, etc., the use of cinematic language or cinematic diction, cinematic styling through the mise en scène, the shot composition, the different kinds of takes that are given to the actors, what happens is when two completely ethically different acts are put on the same plane through this kind of construction of the scene, we are not really inside a feminist project or a project that allows female subjectivities to enter into their own or attain agency. What we see instead is, a kind of patriarchal projection of the goals of feminist work or feminist justice as just another interpersonal conflict. So it's deflating and dehistoricizing the work of feminism or the work of considering women as equal subjects, etc. So I think it would be possible to examine how the so-called women's film, and there are many kinds of films that are made for female actresses as vehicles or as important, giving them important parts, etc., for commercial reasons. So, if we look at the women's film and what it achieves versus the more mundane kind of commercial film and how they play women or play women's parts or showcase women's parts, etc., we find that the how the camera works or shot composition tells us a great deal more than sometimes the plot can. So, on this note, I would like to conclude perhaps. So, in the course of this presentation, I hope it has been possible for all of us to consider how the gaze and how the use of shots helps us to create subjectivities and to indicate to the viewer how to evaluate these subjectivities. So effectively, what we find is, even though a film can be marketed to us as a woman's film, it need not necessarily be a film that gives women the room or the possibilities for dialogue that other films not marketed as female films might do, and at the same time to understand the paucity and the relatively low level given to female parts and female narrativizations. So, going back to where I began, the Bechdel test, we will find that the Bechdel test still remains a useful way of thinking or perceiving female characters, or perceiving the importance and role given to this whole idea of what the feminine means. So, female interiority, female subjectivity can be evaluated in various ways, including, of course, the interactions that female characters have with other female characters. These interactions are usually either few or marginal, except in some films, and given how few and marginal they are, we can actually use, or we can actually evaluate how disruptive or how conventional they are through how shot composition and mise en scène are constructed. So with this I would like to end. Thank you.